Good morning. Alrighty, how's everybody's week? Good, hopefully. Good. Nice. Great, good. Well, we'll be continuing back in our study. If you weren't with us last week, or just to remind you, we're doing a study this quarter on encounters with Jesus. So we're looking at several different people Jesus encountered in Scripture, kind of looking and breaking his traits down or actions on how he dealt with different people and how that brought about results in that interaction. Obviously, nobody can do it better than Jesus, but even Jesus didn't have successful outcomes with all his interactions, but still a lot we can learn from those interactions. Last week we started on looking at encounters in general. We looked at and kind of made a list together as a class on what affects or what impacts an interaction or an encounter when we have encounter someone. Go back through that list initially. We will look at it again whenever we complete our study on the widow at Nain, that's the first encounter we began looking at. So if you want to flip back over to Luke chapter 7, that's where we'll be picking up today and finish out our study on that passage. And then if there's time, we'll get into Jesus' encounter with Nicodemus in John 3. Flip over to Luke 7 here. So before we get into it, it's a fairly short read, I think 7 verses. Would somebody mind just refreshing us on this passage and reading Luke 7, verse 11 through 17? Anybody mind doing that?
Now it happened the day after that he went to the city called Nain. Many of his disciples were with him in a large crowd. Before he came near the gate of the city, behold, a rich man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, "Do not weep." And he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." So he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. And fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people." This report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region.
Okay. Thanks, Donald. So last week, just to recap briefly, we talked about what does this scripture indicate allowed or promoted Jesus to have this interaction with this widow. This is compassion, right? Scripture says Jesus had compassion for the woman, and that seems to have driven his motivation to have contact with this widow. Then we looked at what may have been the reasoning for that compassion. And then we also talked about what was going on at the time Jesus had this contact with the widow. And he had just arrived from a trip. Him and his disciples had come down from Capernaum and just arrived at Nain. We talked a little bit about the terrain and the type of journey that would have been, and how I think we feel like when we complete a trip, and I think it's pretty easy to say we're kind of self-focused whenever we're just arriving at our destination for our trip. Either it is out of fatigue and we want to rest up, or we want to focus on what we're there to do. Yet Jesus stopped and took time to attend to the needs of this widow. Excuse me. Now I want to look at, this is part we didn't get into last week. Who are the people in this passage? Who are the people or groups of people mentioned in this passage? Who do we have?
Disciples.
Okay, we have Jesus' disciples. Yep. The crowd from Nain, yep. We obviously have the widow, right? We have her dead son. Aaron, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, and then, top all along with
Jesus
Jesus.
is there, yes. And then we also we kind of have two crowds meeting, right? We have a crowd, we have the crowd from Nain, then we have Jesus' disciples who are following him. But there's also, Luke here differentiates in the people following Jesus. There were his disciples following him from Capernaum, but there was also a group that was following him. I think that's interesting, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So we have 5 people or groups of people identified, not counting Jesus, in this passage. How are each one of these groups or people affected by Jesus? And you can start in any order if you want.
You say the disciples were, like for better word, captivated by Jesus through his teaching, through his example. So obviously they were following him, to witness what he was doing, and then eventually they would be given the keys to go out and do it themselves.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty interesting thing to think about how this would have impacted the disciples, Jesus' disciples at the time. If they're a disciple of Christ, what have they done? What do we know about them if they're identified as a disciple of Christ? Have they made a commitment to Jesus? So they've based off what they've heard and seen, they believe in him enough to make a commitment to be a dedicated follower of him. Okay? And there's cost involved in that, right? There's no doubt there's been a change in lifestyle at the least. Could have involved changing occupations, getting rid of habits, possibly even turning away from family. There's a lot of sacrifice here. And, initially they had enough belief to make those commitments or sacrifices. But do you think seeing Jesus perform this miracle did anything to them? Did it reassure them that they've made the right decision? They've made the right commitment, that those sacrifices are worth it because they have truly found and are now following the Son of God. I think, to me, that would be a huge impact on them, or a huge way this would encourage them. After you choose to follow something or be dedicated to something, and you start realizing the sacrifices or the cost of it, it's easy to sit there and say, is this really worth it? Right? It's easy to have times, I think if we're all honest with ourselves in our faith, we probably have times in our faith and say, is this hardship, are difficulties worth it? And here for them, I think one thing we can draw from Jesus' interaction with them is, yes, it absolutely is. This is a huge encouragement to them to further prove Jesus who he says he is, and that following him is well worth all the costs that present himself in this physical life. So we have his disciples. Anybody have anything else that jumped out at them about how the disciples would have been impacted? Okay. How about the widow? How was the widow impacted? Yeah. And we talked about a little bit last week the desperation or the desperate situation she would have been put in. Her husband's dead, and her only son is now dead. So the opportunities for her to be provided for on a physical nature were gone. And she's in a pretty desperate situation, and Jesus has just completely taken her out of that desperate situation and restored a lot of hope to her, right? So, yes, she was hugely impacted, not to mention on the emotional side of having her son physically returned to her. Anybody else? Okay. What about the dead son? What was the result of his interaction with Jesus, Aaron?
I would think, well, obviously, you know, at one point he's dead. It doesn't mention what his spiritual state was before he died. But even if maybe he had an all right spiritual state, I could imagine, and I think a lot of people have this when just anything dramatic happens in life, right? Any sort of close call. Is I think people reevaluate, or even on a smaller level, like when things happen, you know, you just reevaluate what you're doing with yourself and with your life. And I'd imagine, one, he probably feel much more grateful for probably everything. But two, I think in a sense he'd also be grateful because he's like, oh, I'm still alive. I can still take care of my mother. And of course, you know, take care of yourself. But I think it's more than just, oh, I'm dead, now I'm not dead. You know what I mean? It's all the things that entail now being alive again.
Jesus gave him life, right? He was dead, and Jesus has given him a complete second chance. Do you feel that this dead man has a responsibility to Jesus in any way after this? Would he feel, or do you think he should feel a commitment or a debt to Christ for bringing him back, Aaron?
I just had another thought. At this time, a lot of people still do their best to discredit Jesus, right? I think at some point they wanted to kill Lazarus again because he's sprung back from the dead. I don't remember all the context of that. But everyone else can say, well, maybe that was staged. Maybe that guy didn't actually die, right? Maybe this was all some report. But that guy, he knows. He knows, obviously maybe the widow mother knows that too. He knows for sure that Jesus is real and that he can bring people back to life. And he, conclusion being, is from God. Because he experienced that firsthand in a way that no one else except for a few other Bible characters mentioned in the New Testament have. I think, if anything, I mean, I think that would give him the strongest evidence for like the strongest belief one could have. So yeah, I mean, it'd be some sort of dedication to being like, this guy saved me in the most literal sense. I owe him.
What would you say would be fair for Jesus to ask of this man? Is there anything Jesus could ask of this man that would be unfair? No. Did you have something?
Yeah, I did.
Good.
You know, I think it's interesting that Jesus raises this man for a lot of reasons. We're not told of the faith of either the mother or him, of how he lived his life. We can pretty much assume that Lazarus was a believer in God, and we know when he raised the daughter of Jairus, the parents of the daughter they had faith. say coffin, the King James uses the word bier or B-I-E-R. That, in Jewish custom, this man more than likely was in the linen cloths and was laid, it says open coffin in some of the translations, which is a good illustration. So we can go to our modern day coffin, but that's not what this was at all. And they would have had holes because it would have been, the Jews would have been unclean had they touched the coffin that the dead body is on. So when Jesus comes up and it says he touches it, why they stopped immediately, because why is this man touching this unclean thing? And of course Jesus did it for the reason to raise him, but they of course had no idea that he was doing that. So I think the people carrying it were greatly affected by, because they had no idea what Jesus was going to do. But they stopped immediately because Jesus would now in their mind be unclean for having touched the coffin that the dead body was on. But of course Jesus then immediately raises him from the dead. So I think there's a lot of things playing in there culturally speaking that we're just not aware of. And so I think it's a whole lot of stuff going on in this particular miracle that we can learn from. And I think it's awesome how the Lord uses this, and now we can look at it knowing other scriptures and make application maybe that the original reader may not have been able to do.
Thank you. Anybody else on the dead son and anything about him? What he gained or received from Jesus, or what he would owe Jesus? Yes.
When he was raised from the dead, it said he sat up and he began to speak. I just assume he's talking about like the thing that's happened to him. Like kind of like a testimony to everyone that's there. I don't know if he just talked to his mom or said thank you to Jesus or whatever, but he did speak and people heard him.
Yeah. Be interesting to know what he says at that point. Yeah. It's a good point. Okay. And then like we mentioned, the passage tells us that Jesus was being followed by his disciples and then a crowd. Why is there a separation there? Why not just say a crowd? What's the difference? What differentiates the disciples and the crowd?
The disciples follow him.
Yeah.
The crowd is just there.
Okay. Yeah. So the disciples, they've made that commitment, right? At some level, they've seen enough to make a solid commitment. The crowd, somewhat of a commitment, right? They're willing to go on a journey. We talked about last week. It's a day or two journey, and somewhat of a commitment. But their motivations or reasoning why isn't clear. But there seems to be a level on how much belief maybe they have, Like, the way I take it is these people are like on the fringe, right? Like they've seen things that have caught their attention. They have an interest in Jesus. They see that he's different, but maybe not enough so to fully commit. So then those people who maybe aren't ready to take that full step, make the full commitment to be a follower of Christ, they see this. How does that impact them? How would this impact them in their relationship?
Well, they've never seen anything like this before.
Okay.
Jesus is now on the scene, and, we have all these records of things that he's done, and you can just imagine some of their eyes are just like bulging out going, wow, this guy can do this and he can do that, and let's keep following him to see what else he's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, over time, you would hope that eventually some of these people are getting convinced that, hey, Jesus is a real deal. So yeah, I'll commit now. But there's still some that are probably still out on the fringes. And they're just wanting to see more. Want to see what else this guy can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it would be definitely enough to make some be willing to make that commitment, right? This would be a powerful thing to observe that would no doubt encourage everybody who witnessed it to acknowledge the power that Jesus possesses through God. And then what about the crowd that was from Nain, the crowd who was with the widow, and I'll include in those the ones who were carrying the dead son. How are they impacted by this? Yes, Bill.
A lot of those followers that were going out to learn something new or so, but a lot of those were actually people that, what the Sanhedrin and the other one, can't think of his name, but anyway, they were out there trying to find something that they could, pin on him that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the disciples that followed him, but there was a lot more than just the 12 that we're thinking about.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. There was numerous motives for following Jesus. Some were pure motives, and like Bill points out, some were not. Some were there for evil purposes and to try and basically catch Jesus up. Yeah, good point. Thank you. So this group of people interests me because this could be their first exposure to Jesus ever, right? May have never heard of him, may have probably never seen him before, and this is how they're introduced to him. You know, I think about last week when we were talking about what affects interactions, and I think Aaron might have said, but first impressions. Somebody said first impressions. What a first impression, right? Doesn't get any more powerful than that, yes.
Verse 16 says, then fear came upon all. So, obviously, it had an impact on them.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to lead to our next kind of discussion point in this passage. Do you think God's love for people is demonstrated in this passage? And if so, how so? Is God's love for people demonstrated in this passage?
Yeah. I mean, not that it would have happened, but Jesus could have just kept going.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Says he had compassion on the woman and raised her son. Now, where did that come from? Well, it comes from God.
Yep.
Jesus is God, but where did it come from? God.
That's two comments in a row that you've gotten right onto my next point. So. No, I appreciate it. No, we're on the same track, which might be a scary thing for you if you're on my. So yes, God's love for people is definitely demonstrated in this passage. And how did God demonstrate his love to people? Through what means? Through Jesus, right? In this specific passage, God's love for those people was shown through Jesus. And as a whole, and if we get to it today in our study on Nicodemus, John 3:16, how does God love the world? Show his love to the world through his son, right? Absolutely. You want to steal my next point?
No, it just come to my mind. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1 says, God, who in various times and various ways spoke in times past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son. So,
Yep.
there it is.
Yeah.
That's the picture.
Absolutely.
We're seeing it.
Yeah. Yep. So here's my next question. Now that Jesus is not physically here on this earth, how is God's love shown to people?
Well, I think the example of Jesus is perfect.
Sure.
here. His compassion led him to act.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have that same type of
Anybody else? Ways God shows his love today, to people today. Through what means?
When we've been crucified with Christ, no longer I live, but Christ lives in me. You think about agape love, the definition of agape love is literally the love that we're showing to other people. And we're supposed to put other people before ourselves, so the selfless acts of Christians shows God's love through that. And it's the physical agape love through Christians, whereas we don't have the physical Jesus, but we have the physical agape love through Christians if we're doing it. But we also have the opposite of that too. We have the hypocritical and not showing love, which affects people as well. And I think it's interesting in passages like this, how much we think, well, he would have so much faith. But then we see people, I mean, it's estimated to be, what's there, 1 million people in Acts chapter 2, and 3,000 get saved. 1 million people, literally watching the apostles perform miracles, and 3,000 are saved. And then how many of those are faithful to the day they die? I don't know.
Yeah.
But then we sit today and we have all these examples, all these stories, all these things, and yet there's just a lack of care, a lack of desire to be truly faithful. And so today, agape love through Christians is how it's shown. Obviously, God works through his providence, through the creation, shows the love of God, just the ability for our bodies to heal itself. We create our own band-aids, like our body will heal itself if we treat it right. I mean, there's so many things that God's in. I mean, it's just everywhere. If you really stop and understand how things work, and not get too busy just living. And so God's love shown through the way the trees clean the air, and the way our body heals itself, the way our body is designed, the way our brains work. I mean, God is everywhere, and his love, 1 John 4, 7, and 8, God is love, and in everything he created, it's shown his love. And so I think the biggest way physically we understand it or feel it, you might say, when we can't have miracles, is through the agape love of Christians. And that's why it's so important that we are God's representatives in all aspects of our life.
Absolutely. I think I would never want to limit God to a singular way, like Zach alluded to. We can see God's love in everything. But a primary purpose in what hopefully is our mission individually as a child of God, and collectively as a group here, is to let God's love for the community, individuals, be seen through us. Our actions or love for people, for the community, allowing people to see God's love for them. You know, I think that's, if we have a mission here as a congregation, I hope that would be one of our top priorities, is being able to say that God's love for our community is shown through us. And, you know, maybe that's something we need to reflect on, and I think if we did, we would have numerous examples that we could articulate, that things this group does that helps the community, helps people see God's love for them, you know, and we need to challenge ourselves to continually be looking for ways to do that. Any comments or thoughts on that?
I think we get, I mean, it's said a lot, but I think it's a good reminder that we get so caught up in love as just caring for someone and taking care of them. But God showed his love through the flood.
Yeah.
And killed everybody.
Yeah.
Like literally destroyed the earth and changed the way the earth worked because of sin. And that was God's love. God is love. And so God is love through everything. And he left 8 souls here to reproduce, you know, to where we are today. But, you know, God is love through the good and the bad. God is love, and sometimes love is hate. Sometimes love is hard. And sometimes love is taking a rod to your backside. Like, it's God has punished and will continue to do so for those that are not faithful, those that are not following him. And so love is
Yeah. Yeah, definitely an aspect of love we overlook for sure is the discipline side, you know.
Especially in our society.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of our prosperity, I think there's a lot to do with it.
Yeah. So to kind of to cap off that thought, the verse Donald mentioned, everybody. Verse 16 says, what you want to read again? Do you have it available? Verse 16, it said, fear gripped them all. So everybody who witnessed this event was struck with a fear or a respect or an awe or a reverence for Jesus and his ability to do this. I think that's understandable. If we saw this occur, it's obviously going to get our attention and allow us to have a greater respect for Jesus or the person we see do this. So I want to look at, we came up with a list last week of traits or characteristics that we feel are important to our interactions or to the success or the outcome of our interactions with people. And I think there's no doubt, we came up with a list of 5 people or groups of people that Jesus had an impact on, influenced during this encounter. And I want to look at our list and go down through and see how those traits or characteristics factored into Jesus having those successful outcomes. I'll go through the list we came up with in class first, and we've kind of already hit on it, but first impression, right? Jesus' first impression with the widow and with the people, how did that impact or influence this interaction? You can kind of incorporate a few of the other ones in this, but he was willing to relate to her, have compassion for her, make time for her, and all of those actions allowed for him to have this successful interaction. Demeanor, again, he was compassionate to her. I think, Donald, this one was yours. It resulted in encouragement, right? I think we talked about when we went through this list, the encouragement that it must have been to all of them. The circumstances, one we talked about, he was just arriving there from his journey, so that could have definitely been a deterrent for Jesus to act in this situation, but he overcame that. Spoken words versus unspoken words. That's an interesting one. Were there any words spoken or words that weren't said that are of interest to you in this passage?
Well, as her son's being carried out, obviously all of her emotions are all over her face, her body, and so he saw that. That's what he saw.
Yeah.
When you see a mother lose a child, I mean, if you've ever been at a funeral where that happens, the mom's usually just a mess.
No.
Especially when the body's being carried out, and so we see that, and we can think about that today because we've probably seen something like it.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's seeing that, and he has the ability to do something about it.
Yeah.
Whereas we, in our minds, what can we do besides be there? Not a lot. We can't bring somebody back from the dead. So, but he has that ability. And it's pretty neat that he was able to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the outward pouring of her body and expression would have been what he saw,
Yeah.
not words.
And just for time's sake, I'll go through just and hit a few more of these because we developed quite a lengthy list. But we said if we see a need, then we act on it. And that's absolutely what Jesus did here. Like Zach just pointed out, her emotions were clear, right? She's distraught, I'm sure. She's weeping, and Jesus saw a need there, and he acted on it. Let's see. There was an interest level or a sincerity for sure on Jesus' part. And then blind to status. Was Jesus' actions here to help this lady based on any personal motivation? Did she have any status in this community or any way of advancing Jesus in any way for helping her? Doesn't appear so. Nain was a fairly small town, basically a farming village, and she, from what we know, had like no significant status in any way, so that played no role, but yet Jesus was still willing to take time and help her.
Steve, I have a kind of crazy question though.
Oh, okay. Dan, you ready? No, I'm just kidding.
Did the situation advance that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that was the purpose of him doing those miracles, was to advance him, cause people to believe, right? And I think there's no question it caused people to believe in him. Absolutely. And that was his motivation. Was it so he would be physically advanced? No. Like, he wasn't trying to gain financially from it. He wasn't trying to be voted a physical king or ruler over these people. But yes, it totally did advance him in his mission of gaining believers in him and God, I think. So.
Verse 16 again, it says, then fear came upon all, and they glorified God.
Yep.
Isn't that the end goal?
Yeah.
If you think about it, if it would have been for financial gain, he wouldn't have helped a widow.
Right. Exactly.
Nothing.
Right. Status. He didn't help her because of her status. Right.
You know, like the leader of the community's son,
Mm-hmm.
he would have been doing it for maybe,
Right.
not that he wouldn't have helped, but you know what I mean? Like, it's fairly pointed out here that, hey, this is a widow.
Yeah.
And we understand widows in that time are
Yeah.
one of the least of society, unfortunately, but not taken care of a lot of times, and that's, I mean, Acts 7 is the reason that's written, but,
Okay. So to get back to the people who are represented in this passage, if you had to pick out one person or group of people in this passage, could you say one of these people represents us in some way, or is a parallel to us somehow? Yes.
Well, Dan already stole a good idea earlier by mentioning the parallels between being saved from sin and being resurrected spiritually. But as the crowd, well, we're not there in person. These accounts of these miracles are part of, as they could by these acts of miracles gave them an impression of Jesus. We can use them to also gain an impression and understanding of Jesus and how he was, how he thought, and how he did things.
Yeah. So you would parallel us to like the group of followers?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that's fair. Yes. You've heard this before, so if you steal my answer, you're in trouble.
I don't know if I'm going to, but I just think it's interesting that all the people, no matter who they were or where they came from, they all gave God the glory. Like, this had to have been God working here, because the Pharisees didn't think that. They kept accusing Jesus of being like the devil or from the devil, but that wasn't the people's reaction when they saw this. They knew automatically, he is a great prophet, but this must be from God or from the devil.
Yeah.
So they all automatically gave God the glory, and the whole purpose of our lives is to give God the glory.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, really though, well, and we'll get into this with Nicodemus, the Pharisees knew they didn't want to recognize it because it would cost them. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's a good point. That through this that they all saw the importance of glorifying God. You know, if I had to assign a person to represent us, it would obviously, to me, the dead man is who is representative of us. Our interaction with Jesus, he brought us from spiritual death to spiritual life. And when we think about that, and when we talked about the dead man in the passage, we talked about what would it be unfair of Jesus to ask of him, and we pretty much we felt it was fair for Jesus to ask that dead man for anything, right? So if we are parallel or represented by that dead man in our relationship with Jesus, the same would apply. What is it fair for Jesus to ask of us when he has taken us from the dead man to live again? And if you know, whenever we ask it like that, it may be a little tougher. Well, maybe he shouldn't be able to ask us to do quite all that. Maybe it wouldn't be fair for him to ask us to give up everything we want, you know. But if we're honest about it, if it was fair for the dead man to give up everything to be loyal or pay back or give Jesus what he owed him, that's the same thing for us, right? Jesus died for us so we could be forgiven and have spiritual life again. So it is only fair for us to give our life here on this earth back to him. And that's what he asks of us. Are we willing to recognize Jesus' gift for us and show that thankfulness and appreciation to him for what he did for us by sacrificing back for him? Bill, did you have something? Oh, I thought I saw your hand. Okay.
When I touch one of my ears, if I touch the right ear, I'm turning you up, and if I touch this one, I'm turning you down a little bit.
Okay. So all right, I know you're not liking what I'm saying if you go to your left ear. All right. That's good to know. All right. So we'll try to keep it to the right. So the one, yeah, I think that's something, you know, there's so much we can take from this passage. It's obviously a very impactful passage on God's love for his people, the power he instilled in Jesus to be able to do miraculous things while here on earth. But it's also a great reminder when we look at it and apply it to ourselves of how much we owe God, how much he loves us, how much we owe God for that love, and what we need to be willing to sacrifice back to him to show him our appreciation for that love. Last week I mentioned I hope that we can pick one trait or one characteristic, if not or more, but at least one from Jesus that we can add to our life or work on in our life, be more Christ-like, and hopefully impact our interactions with people in a positive way. And the obvious one or the main one from this passage is compassion. So for this lesson or for this next week, I'm going to challenge us all to really think about the compassion we show to people in our life and to work on it. I'd say every one of us could be more compassionate. None of us have the compassion, Jesus' level of compassion. And that's something we have to constantly strive towards. So I'm going to challenge us to focus on that. Think about how can we be more compassionate in our actions with people. And I think if we're constantly reminding ourselves on that and striving for it, we will see growth in that area. And no doubt it will have a positive impact on our interactions with others. So that's it for that lesson. Just a reminder, next week, Elias will be here. He'll be doing Bible class, so we won't have this study, but he'll be giving a report on his work in the Spanish ministry next week for Bible class, so we're looking forward to that. So then the week following that, we will get to our study in John 3 with Jesus' interaction with Nicodemus, which is extremely powerful interaction and a ton to talk about. So looking forward to that. Thank you for your time and comments. Appreciate it.